Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. The limestone dust still coated my fingernails when Father Brennan handed me the sealed envelope. 3 weeks of excavation work beneath St. Peter's Basilica. And this was my reward. A transfer order signed in red ink. Pack your tools, Garrett, he said, not meeting my eyes. You leave for the archives tonight. I'd been digging in the Vatican's underground chambers since my archaeology degree landed me this position 2 years ago. Most days brought pottery shards and coin fragments from centuries past. Nothing that would make headlines. Nothing that would change the course of human understanding about divine beings walking among us. But Tuesday had been different. We'd broken through a wall that shouldn't have existed according to every blueprint and survey map the church maintained. Behind it lay a chamber carved from solid rock, untouched for what looked like 1,000 years. The air inside tasted metallic and sweet, like copper pennies dissolved in honey. That's where we found the skeleton. It measured nearly 8 foot tall, lying on a stone slab in the center of the room. The bones gleamed white as fresh snow, showing no signs of decay or discoloration. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I brushed away centuries of dust. The shoulder blades extended outward in ways human anatomy couldn't support. Where arms should connect to the torso, additional joints created space for appendages that clearly weren't arms at all. The rib cage curved differently, too, larger and more barrel-shaped, as if built to house organs we didn't possess. Dr. Whitman, our lead archaeologist, had gone pale as milk when he saw it. He'd sent everyone else away immediately, claiming we needed to document the find properly before allowing other eyes to see it. This stays between us until we understand what we're dealing with, he'd whispered, running his hands through his graying hair. Garrett, I need you to photograph everything. Every bone. Every angle. Every detail. I'd spent hours with my camera capturing images from positions that showed the skeleton's true nature. The bone structure told a story that contradicted everything we thought we knew about the physical world. Then Dr. Whitman had disappeared. I'd arrived at the site Wednesday morning to find the chamber sealed with fresh concrete. When I asked Father Brennan about it, he'd claimed ignorance of any excavation work in that area. The official log showed no record of our discovery. Now 3 days later, I sat in my small apartment near Vatican City, staring at the envelope Father Brennan had given me. The transfer order inside assigned me to catalog duties in the restricted archives. A demotion disguised as a lateral move. My camera bag sat on the kitchen table containing the only proof that we'd found something extraordinary. The photos showed every detail of the skeleton, including close-ups of the bone structure that proved it belonged to no earthly creature. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Garrett Michaels. The man outside wore a simple black suit and spoke with an American accent that reminded me of home. I'm Agent Nolan Burke. Vatican Security. May I come in? I'd never heard of Vatican Security having American agents, but I opened the door anyway. Burke looked like he could have been a college football player a decade ago. Broad shoulders, clean-shaven face, and eyes that missed nothing as they scanned my apartment. I understand you've been working on the excavation project beneath St. Peter's, he said, settling into my desk chair without invitation. Father Brennan mentioned you might have concerns about the recent changes to your assignment. What happened to Dr. Whitman? Burke's expression didn't change. Dr. Whitman suffered a heart attack Tuesday evening. He's recovering at a private medical facility outside Rome. Can I visit him? I'm afraid that won't be possible. His family has requested no visitors during his recovery period. Burke leaned forward slightly. Garrett, I need to ask you about anything unusual you might have discovered during your work. Any artifacts or remains that seemed out of place. I looked at my camera bag, then back at Burke. Something about his calm demeanor and rehearsed answers made me hesitate. We found some pottery fragments, I said. Nothing significant. No skeletal remains. No organic materials that might have been preserved in the limestone environment. The question was too specific. Burke knew exactly what we'd found. No, I lied. Just broken ceramics and some corroded metal pieces. Burke studied my face for a long moment, then smiled. That's good to hear. Sometimes these old chambers contain biological materials that can be hazardous if not handled properly. Bacteria, mold spores, that sort of thing. He stood and walked to my kitchen table, his eyes lingering on the camera bag. I assume you documented your work with photographs. Standard procedure, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the images are stored on church servers. I don't keep personal copies. Of course not. Burke moved away from the table. Well, I think that covers everything. Enjoy your new position in the archives, Garrett. It's important work preserving our history for future generations. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for an hour staring at the camera bag. Burke's visit confirmed what I'd already suspected. The church knew exactly what we'd found, and they wanted it buried along with anyone who might talk about it. Dr. Whitman hadn't suffered a heart attack. He'd been silenced, probably permanently. I thought about my options. I could turn over the photographs and hope they'd let me continue my career in peace. I could try to expose the discovery publicly, though, without access to the actual skeleton. The photos alone wouldn't be enough to convince anyone. Or I could do what they clearly expected me to do. Nothing. The decision came easier than I had anticipated. I loaded the photographs onto my laptop and studied them again, looking for details I might have missed during the initial documentation. The bone structure wasn't just different from human anatomy. It was perfect. Each joint showed where patterns consistent with use, meaning this creature had lived and moved during its lifetime. The calcium deposits and mineral content looked identical to bones I'd studied from medieval burial sites. This wasn't a hoax or an elaborate fake. We'd found the remains of something that had once been alive. Something that existed outside our understanding of biological possibilities. Thursday evening, I received a call from Father Brennan. Garrett, I hope you're settling in well with your new assignment. I wanted to let you know that we've arranged for your apartment to be cleaned professionally before you start work Monday. The cleaning crew will need access tomorrow morning. The message was clear enough. They planned to search my apartment for any evidence I might have kept. That's very thoughtful, I said. What time should I expect them? 9 o'clock sharp. Make sure you're not there when they arrive. We don't want to interfere with your weekend plans. I packed a single bag with essentials and left my apartment at dawn Friday morning. The photographs and laptop went with me along with enough cash to last several weeks if necessary. The train to Florence departed Rome at 7:30. I chose a seat near the back and watched the countryside roll past, thinking about what I'd learned during my 2 years working for the church. The Vatican maintained extensive archives containing documents that never saw public view. Historical records, correspondence between church officials and reports from archaeological expeditions around the world. I'd been granted limited access to some of these materials during my work. Enough to understand that the church took discoveries like ours very seriously. They had protocols for dealing with artifacts that challenged official doctrine. Those protocols didn't include publication in academic journals or display in museums. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Garrett, Dr. Whitman here. Need to see you. Can't talk on phone. Meet me at the cafe across from Florence train station at 2 p.m. Come alone. Trust no one else. I stared at the message, my hands shaking slightly. If Dr. Whitman was alive and free to send messages, why hadn't he contacted me sooner? And how had he known I'd be arriving in Florence? The train pulled into the station 15 minutes before 2 o'clock. I found the cafe easily enough. A small place with outdoor seating that offered a clear view of the train platform. Dr. Whitman sat at a corner table wearing civilian clothes instead of his usual work attire. He looked older than I remembered, with deep lines around his eyes and a nervous energy that kept his hands moving constantly. "Garrett," he said as I approached. "Thank God you came. We don't have much time." I sat across from him, noting how he kept glancing at the other customers in the street beyond. "Burke told me you had a heart attack." Dr. Whitman's laugh held no humor. "They tried to kill me. Garrett injected something into my coffee Tuesday night that was supposed to look like cardiac arrest. Lucky for me, I have an irregular heartbeat that made their drug less effective than they'd planned." "Who's they?" "Burke and his people. They're not Vatican security. They're something else entirely. Some kind of cleanup crew that handles discoveries the church wants to disappear." Dr. Whitman reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I managed to record part of a conversation between Burke and Father Brennan while I was pretending to be unconscious in the medical facility. "They're planning to destroy all evidence of what we found, including anyone who might have seen it." He handed me the recorder. "There's more, Garrett. The skeleton we found isn't unique. They've been covering up similar discoveries for decades. Maybe longer. There's a whole network dedicated to suppressing evidence of these creatures." I thought about the photographs in my laptop bag. What do they want from me? Any documentation you might have. Photos, notes, measurements. Once they have everything, you'll suffer an unfortunate accident like several other archaeologists who've stumbled onto inconvenient truths. Dr. Whitman leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But I have a plan. There's someone in the Vatican who's been collecting evidence of these cover-ups for years. Cardinal Rossetti in the restricted archives. He's been waiting for proof solid enough to challenge the people running this operation. The same archives where they've assigned me to work. That's not a coincidence. Garrett Rossetti requested you specifically. He knows about your discovery and wants to help you document what we found before they destroy it completely." I looked around the cafe, noting a man in a dark jacket who'd been reading the same newspaper page for the last 10 minutes. "How do I know you're really Dr. Whitman? How do I know this isn't another setup?" He smiled and pulled out his wallet, showing me a photograph of his daughter holding a geology hammer. The same photo that had sat on his desk in the excavation office. "Remember when you asked me why I became an archaeologist instead of staying in geology? I told you it was because rocks don't lie, but people's stories about them usually do." That conversation had happened during my first week on the job before anyone else had arrived at the site. Only the real Dr. Whitman would remember those specific words. What's Rossetti's plan? Document everything, then release it simultaneously to multiple news organizations and academic institutions. Make it too big to suppress or explain away. Dr. Whitman checked his watch. "Your train back to Rome leaves in an hour. Rossetti will be waiting in Archive Room 7 at 9 o'clock Monday morning. Bring everything you have." As I walked back toward the train station, I noticed the man with the newspaper following at a discreet distance. He made no attempt to hide his presence, which suggested either poor training or a deliberate message. They knew where I was and what I was doing. The question was whether they planned to stop me before I reached Rossetti or wait to see what evidence I might have gathered. The train ride back to Rome gave me time to listen to Dr. Whitman's recording. The audio quality was poor, but I could make out Burke's voice discussing timeline concerns and resource allocation for what he called final cleanup procedures. Father Brennan's voice was harder to distinguish, but I caught references to Protocol 7 and permanent solutions for ongoing security risks. They weren't just planning to destroy the skeleton. They intended to eliminate everyone who knew about it. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. I entered the Vatican through the staff entrance. showing my new identification card to guards who barely glanced at it. The restricted archives occupied the basement levels of a building most tourists never saw, connected to the main complex by underground tunnels that dated back centuries. Archive Room 7 was smaller than I'd expected, lined with climate-controlled storage units that contained documents dating back to the early days of the church. Cardinal Rossetti stood near a reading table, examining what looked like medieval manuscripts. He was younger than most cardinals I'd encountered, probably in his early 50s, with the kind of intense focus that suggested a sharp academic mind. "Mr. Michaels," he said without looking up from his work. "Dr. Whitman told me you might have photographic evidence of last week's discovery." I set my laptop on the reading table and opened the files containing the skeleton photographs. Cardinal Rossetti studied each image carefully, occasionally asking me to zoom in on specific details or explain the context in which the photos were taken. "These bone formations," he said, pointing to the shoulder area. "You're certain they're naturally occurring, not the result of some genetic disorder or deliberate modification. The wear patterns and mineral content are consistent with normal bone development." I said, "Whatever this creature was, it was born with this anatomy." Cardinal Rossetti nodded and walked to one of the storage units. He entered a code into the electronic lock and removed a thick folder bound with red ribbon. "What I'm about to show you doesn't officially exist," he said, untying the ribbon. "These are reports from archaeological expeditions funded by the church over the past 70 years. Expeditions that discovered evidence of creatures that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of natural history." The folder contained dozens of documents, photographs, and sketches. Most were written in Latin or Italian, but I could understand enough to recognize familiar patterns. Skeletal remains found in caves beneath monastery foundations. Bone fragments discovered during construction projects at religious sites. Archaeological finds that had been quietly removed from official records and stored in private collections. "How many?" I asked. 47 confirmed discoveries since 1953, Cardinal Rossetti said. "Probably more that were destroyed before documentation could be preserved." I studied the photographs, noting similarities in bone structure and size. The creatures varied in height and specific anatomical details, but they all shared the same basic characteristics that set them apart from human remains. "What are they?" Cardinal Rossetti returned the folder to its storage unit. "That's what we need to determine. But first, we need to preserve the evidence before Burke's people destroy it completely." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside are contact details for journalists and researchers who specialize in suppressed historical discoveries. People who have the resources and credibility to publicize findings like yours without being easily discredited. "Why haven't you released this information before now?" "Because I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as medieval superstition or misidentified animal remains. Your photographs provide that proof. Clear documentation of anatomical structures that exist outside known biological classifications." Cardinal Rossetti walked to his desk and activated a small device that looked like a radio scanner. Static filled the room, occasionally interrupted by fragments of conversation in Italian. "Burke's team monitors standard communication channels," he explained, "but they can't track everything. I've arranged for copies of your photographs to be transmitted to our contacts within the next 6 hours. Once the information is distributed widely enough, it becomes too expensive to suppress." I thought about Dr. Whitman's warning about permanent solutions for security risks. What happens to us after the information goes public? Hopefully, the publicity provides enough protection to keep us alive long enough to present our full evidence. Burke's people prefer to work in secret. Public attention makes their methods more difficult. A soft chime indicated someone had entered the archive building. Cardinal Rossetti checked his scanner, which showed increased radioactivity on frequencies he'd been monitoring. "They're here," he said calmly. Earlier than I expected, but not entirely surprising. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Archive Room 7. Multiple people moving with purpose toward our location. Cardinal Rossetti opened another storage unit and removed a heavy metal briefcase. "Garrett, I need you to take this and leave through the emergency exit behind the manuscript collection. Follow the tunnel system to the parking garage beneath the Apostolic Palace. Car will be waiting. Dark blue sedan with Vatican plates. What about you? I'll delay them as long as possible. Make sure they understand that killing a cardinal would create complications they're not prepared to handle." The footsteps stopped outside our door. I heard Burke's voice giving quiet instructions to his team. I grabbed the briefcase and moved toward the emergency exit, trying to stay quiet as Cardinal Rossetti positioned himself between the main entrance and my escape route. The door burst open just as I reached the emergency exit. Burke entered with 3 other men, all wearing the same unremarkable business attire that made them blend into any crowd. "Cardinal Rossetti," Burke said politely, "I'm afraid we need to discuss some security concerns related to classified materials." "Of course," Cardinal Rossetti replied, "though I should mention that several copies of those materials have already been distributed to interested parties outside Vatican City." I slipped through the emergency exit as Burke's expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine concern. The tunnel beyond was dimly lit and stretched farther than I'd expected, branching into multiple directions that suggested an extensive underground network. The briefcase was heavier than it looked, and I wondered what Cardinal Rossetti had considered important enough to risk his life protecting. Behind me, I could hear raised voices as Burke's team realized their primary target had escaped. The tunnel system was more complex than Cardinal Rossetti had indicated. Several times, I had to choose between paths that seemed equally likely to lead toward the Apostolic Palace. I tried to maintain a sense of direction, but the underground passages curved and branched in ways that made navigation difficult. After 20 minutes of walking, I found an exit that led to what looked like a maintenance area beneath a large building. The parking garage was 1 level up, accessible through a service elevator that required a keycard. I tried the elevator anyway, hoping Cardinal Rossetti had arranged access, but the controls remained inactive. The stairwell next to the elevator was unlocked, so I climbed to the parking level and looked for a dark blue sedan with Vatican plates. The car was parked near the garage entrance, exactly where Cardinal Rossetti had promised. The driver was a woman in her 30s wearing priest's clothing, which surprised me until I remembered that some Catholic churches had begun ordaining women in recent years. "Garrett Michaels?" she asked as I approached the car. "Yes, I'm Father Patricia Kane. Cardinal Rossetti asked me to get you somewhere safe while his contacts prepare to release your documentation." I got into the passenger seat, setting the briefcase on the floor between my feet. Father Kane drove out of the parking garage and into Rome's morning traffic, taking a route that avoided the main tourist areas around Vatican City. "How long have you known about the skeleton discoveries?" I asked. "About 3 years. Cardinal Rossetti recruited me after I started asking questions about discrepancies in official church archaeology reports." She turned onto a side street that led away from the city center. "I have a background in forensic anthropology, so I was able to help him analyze some of the evidence." "Where are we going?" "Safe house outside Rome. Somewhere Burke's people won't find us while the information gets distributed to news organizations." I thought about Dr. Whitman's warning about Burke's methods. What happens if they catch up with us before the story goes public? Father Kane glanced in the rearview mirror. "Then we hope Cardinal Rossetti was right about publicity providing protection." The safe house turned out to be a small farm about 40 kilometers from Rome, surrounded by olive groves that provided natural cover from surveillance. Father Kane parked the car in a barn behind the main house where it wouldn't be visible from the road. Inside the briefcase, I found additional documentation that Cardinal Rossetti had collected over the years. Correspondence between church officials discussing the suppression of archaeological discoveries. Financial records showing payments to construction companies for emergency renovation projects at sites where skeletons had been found. Medical reports describing the deaths of archaeologists and researchers who had worked on sensitive excavations. The pattern was clear and consistent. The church had been systematically covering up evidence of these creatures for decades using methods that ranged from academic pressure to permanent elimination of witnesses. How did Cardinal Rossetti avoid ending up like the others? I asked Father Kane. Careful planning and powerful friends, she said. Brewing coffee in the farmhouse kitchen. He's been building a network of people inside and outside the church who want to see this information made public. When you have enough allies in the right positions, it becomes harder for people like Burke to operate with complete freedom. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The sender had included a photograph of Cardinal Rossetti sitting in what looked like a hospital room with Burke standing beside his bed. The message read, "We have your friend. Bring the briefcase to the address I'm sending you. You have 2 hours." Father Kane read the message over my shoulder. "It's a trap," she said immediately. "Even if you give them everything, they'll kill both of you. But if I don't go, they'll definitely kill Cardinal Rossetti." Cardinal Rossetti knew this might happen. He told me to make sure you understood that releasing the information was more important than any individual life, including his own. I stared at the photograph, noting that Cardinal Rossetti looked alert and uninjured. Burke's message suggested he was still alive, which meant there might be time to rescue him if I acted quickly. How long until the story goes public? Father Kane checked her watch. For more hours if everything goes according to plan. Cardinal Rossetti's contacts need time to verify the information and coordinate simultaneous publication. For hours seemed like an eternity when someone's life hung in the balance. But I understood Cardinal Rossetti's logic. Rescuing him wouldn't matter if Burke's people succeeded in suppressing all the evidence afterward. Another text message arrived with an address in Rome and a warning that any delay would result in Cardinal Rossetti's immediate death. I made my decision. The address Burke had sent led to an abandoned construction site on the outskirts of Rome. Father Kane had insisted on coming with me despite my arguments that we shouldn't risk losing both the evidence and our lives in a rescue attempt that might not succeed. Cardinal Rossetti specifically chose me to help with this operation. She'd said while loading a pistol I hadn't known she carried. "I'm not abandoning him now." We'd left copies of the briefcase contents with Father Kane's contacts before driving back to Rome. If Burke killed us, at least the evidence would still reach the public eventually. The construction site consisted of several half-finished buildings surrounded by heavy machinery and piles of building materials. Burke's message had specified Building 3. Which looked more complete than the others. I carried the briefcase while Father Kane positioned herself where she could provide cover if Burke's team tried to ambush us. The plan was simple. Exchange the evidence for Cardinal Rossetti. Then get out before Burke decided to eliminate all the witnesses. Burke waited in what would eventually be the building's lobby, flanked by the same 3 men who'd been with him at the archives. Cardinal Rossetti sat in a chair near the back wall, his hands bound but otherwise appearing unharmed. "Garrett," Burke said as I entered, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this situation. Let Cardinal Rossetti go, and you can have everything we found." "I'm afraid that's not how this works." Burke nodded to one of his men, who moved to block the entrance I'd used. "You see, we've learned that copies of your photographs have already been distributed to various news organizations. That creates complications we need to address." I'd expected this. Burke was too professional to let witnesses walk away from an operation that had already been compromised. "So, what do you want?" "Information about everyone who's seen the evidence. Names, locations, communication methods, Help us identify all the people who need to be contacted about retracting their stories. Cardinal Rossetti spoke from his chair. Garrett, don't tell them anything. The information is already beyond their reach. Burke walked over to Cardinal Rossetti and hit him across the face with the back of his hand. Your friend's cooperation will determine how quickly you die. Cardinal. I set the briefcase on the floor between us. Everything we found is in there. Photos, documentation, analysis reports. Take it and let us go. Open it. I entered the combination Cardinal Rossetti had given me and stepped back as Burke examined the contents. He spent several minutes reviewing the photographs and documents, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. This is comprehensive work, he said finally, but it's also incomplete. Where are the bone samples you collected from the skeleton? I hadn't collected any bone samples. Dr. Whitman had been responsible for that part of the documentation process, and he'd never mentioned taking physical specimens. We didn't have authorization to remove parts of the skeleton, I said. Burke's expression suggested he didn't believe me. He nodded to one of his men, who produced a small device that looked like a medical scanner. This detects trace amounts of calcium phosphate and other minerals specific to the bone composition we found in the chamber. Burke explained, if you handled bone samples recently, it will show residue on your clothing and skin. The man with the scanner moved it over my hands and jacket, then shook his head to indicate negative results. Interesting, Burke said. Dr. Whitman's clothes showed positive traces when we tested him. He definitely collected samples before we sealed the chamber. Where is Dr. Whitman now? Dead. Unfortunately, he proved less cooperative than we'd hoped. The casual way Burke announced Dr. Whitman's death confirmed what I'd already suspected about his methods. These people eliminated problems permanently without regard for legal or moral consequences. So, what happens to us? Burke closed the briefcase and handed it to one of his men. That depends on how quickly we can locate and neutralize the information you've already distributed. Cardinal Rossetti's contacts in the media might be willing to suppress the story if they understand the potential consequences of publication. What consequences? Public panic, religious upheaval, political instability, the kind of chaos that results when people's fundamental beliefs about reality get challenged by evidence they're not prepared to understand. Cardinal Rossetti laughed despite his situation. You really believe you're protecting people by hiding the truth? I believe some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. Burke replied, the existence of these creatures raises questions that most people aren't equipped to handle. Questions about human origins, religious doctrine, and our place in the natural order. So, you kill anyone who might ask those questions. When necessary. Yes. A gunshot echoed through the building, followed by shouts from Burke's men positioned outside. Father Kane had apparently decided that our negotiation wasn't proceeding successfully. Burke drew his weapon and signaled his team to take defensive positions. It seems your backup has arrived, Garrett. Unfortunately, that changes our timeline considerably. One of Burke's men spoke into a radio, reporting their position and requesting additional support. The response indicated that reinforcements would arrive within 15 minutes. Here's what's going to happen, Burke said, keeping his gun trained on me while his men prepared to repel Father Kane's assault. You're going to call your friend and tell her to surrender. In exchange, I'll make your deaths quick and painless instead of the prolonged interrogation I had planned. And if I refuse, then you'll watch Cardinal Rossetti die slowly while my men hunt down Father Kane and bring her back here for similar treatment. More gunshots outside closer this time. Father Kane was either advancing on the building or drawing Burke's external security toward her position. I had to make a choice. Surrender and hope Father Kane could escape with news of our location, or try to buy more time and risk getting everyone killed in a shootout we couldn't win. The decision was made for me when Father Kane appeared at a second-floor window, using what looked like a sniper rifle to target Burke's men below. Father Kane seems to have more military training than I expected. Burke observed as his team scrambled for cover. Where did Cardinal Rossetti find her? Does it matter? Not really. My reinforcements include helicopter support and enough personnel to secure this entire area. Your friend's tactical advantage won't last long. I heard the sound of approaching aircraft confirming Burke's claim about aerial support. Whatever plan Father Kane had developed, it needed to succeed quickly or we'd all be dead within the next few minutes. Cardinal Rossetti had been working at the ropes binding his hands while Burke's attention was focused on the battle outside. He caught my eye and nodded toward a pile of construction materials near the back wall. I understood. He wanted me to create a distraction that would give him a chance to escape his restraints and join the fight. Burke, I said loudly, what if I told you the briefcase doesn't contain all our evidence? His attention shifted back to me immediately. What do you mean? Cardinal Rossetti hid additional documentation before your people found him. Copies of everything. Plus evidence about other discoveries your organization has covered up over the years. Where? Safe location. I can take you there. But only if you guarantee Cardinal Rosette's safety. Burke studied my face, trying to determine whether I was telling the truth or simply buying time. Behind him, Cardinal Rossetti had nearly freed his hands from the ropes. You have 30 seconds to convince me you're not lying. Burke said. The evidence includes financial records showing payments to construction companies for emergency renovation projects. Medical reports about the deaths of archaeologists who worked on sensitive excavations. Correspondence between church officials discussing the suppression of discoveries. Burke's expression showed that I'd mentioned information he recognized. Either he was involved in some of those cover-up operations or he'd been briefed about them. Those records are classified at the highest levels. He said, how did Cardinal Rossetti gain access to them? He's been collecting evidence for years, building a case against your entire operation. The skeleton we found was just the final piece he needed to prove the pattern of suppression. Cardinal Rossetti had freed his hands and was slowly moving toward the construction materials. Staying behind Burke's line of sight, the helicopter sounds were getting louder, indicating Burke's reinforcements would arrive soon. Father Kane's rifle fire had stopped, which either meant she'd been killed or was repositioning for a different approach. Where are these additional records hidden? Burke demanded. I'll show you after Cardinal Rossetti is released and we're somewhere safe. That's not going to happen. Garrett, my orders are to eliminate all witnesses and recover all evidence. Your cooperation might earn you a quicker death, but it won't save your life. Cardinal Rossetti reached the construction materials and found what he'd been looking for. A heavy piece of rebar about 3 feet long. He moved quietly toward Burke's position, staying low behind concrete blocks and machinery. I needed to keep Burke's attention focused away from Cardinal Rossetti for just a few more seconds. What happens after you kill us? I asked. How do you plan to stop the news organizations from publishing the story? Economic pressure, legal threats, political influence. Most journalists can be convinced to drop stories if the consequences of publication outweigh the benefits. And if that doesn't work, then we identify the specific reporters and editors involved and address them individually. The same methods we've used successfully for decades. Cardinal Rossetti was within striking distance now, raising the rebar above his head. I prepared to dive for cover when he made his move. The attack came suddenly. Cardinal Rossetti brought the rebar down hard on Burke's shoulder, sending his gun flying across the room. Burke stumbled forward, cursing as he tried to regain his balance. I grabbed the briefcase and ran toward the back exit while Cardinal Rossetti grappled with Burke. The other men in Burke's team were still dealing with Father Kane's assault from outside, giving us a brief window to escape. Cardinal Rossetti broke free from Burke and followed me toward the exit. But Burke had recovered his weapon and was raising it to fire. Father Kane appeared at the window again, putting a rifle shot through the glass near Burke's position. He dove for cover, giving us the time we needed to reach the exit. We emerged from the building into chaos. Burke's reinforcements had arrived and were deploying around the construction site. But Father Kane had apparently anticipated this and positioned explosive charges that were now detonating systematically around the perimeter. She turned the construction site into a war zone with heavy machinery and building materials, providing cover as we moved toward her position. "This way," Cardinal Rossetti shouted over the noise of gunfire and explosions. Father Kane left a vehicle on the north side. We ran through the construction site, dodging bullets and debris as Burke's team tried to surround us. The helicopter overhead was providing tactical support, but couldn't land in the chaos Father Kane had created. Father Kane met us at the vehicle, a military-style truck that looked like it could handle rough terrain and hostile conditions. "Where did you get this?" I asked as we climbed into the truck. "Cardinal Rossetti has more resources than Burke realizes," she said, starting the engine, including friends in Italian military intelligence who don't appreciate foreign operatives conducting assassination missions on their territory. We drove away from the construction site as more explosions rocked the area behind us. In the rear view mirror, I could see Burke's helicopter circling the site, looking for targets that were no longer there. "How long until the story goes public?" Cardinal Rossetti asked. Father Kane checked her watch. 2 hours. Multiple news organizations. Simultaneous publication. Enough documentation to make suppression virtually impossible. Burke will try to stop them. Burke's operation just became an international incident. Father Ka said Italian authorities are already investigating the explosions and gunfire at the construction site. When they find evidence of foreign operatives conducting illegal activities on Italian soil, Burke's people will have bigger problems than managing media coverage. I thought about everything we'd been through to preserve evidence of a single skeleton discovery. Was it worth it? Cardinal Rossetti turned to look at me. "Garrett, we found proof that creatures exist outside our understanding of natural history. Evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about human origins and our place in the world. That knowledge belongs to humanity, not to organizations that profit from keeping people ignorant." What happens next? Now, we wait to see how the world responds to learning that we're not alone. 2 hours later, sitting in a safe house outside Rome, we watched the first news reports appear on international television networks. The story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms with photographs and documentation that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. The Vatican issued an immediate statement denying knowledge of any unusual archaeological discoveries. But the evidence Cardinal Rossetti had collected over the years contradicted their official position. Burke's organization tried to discredit the story by claiming the photographs were elaborate hoaxes, but independent analysis by forensic experts confirmed the authenticity of the bone structures we documented. Within 24 hours, the discovery had become the most significant archaeological news story of the century. Religious leaders, scientists, and government officials worldwide were forced to address questions about what the existence of these creatures meant for human understanding of our origins and place in the universe. Some demanded access to the physical remains for further study. Others called for complete suppression of the information, claiming it posed a threat to social stability and religious faith. But the knowledge was already beyond anyone's ability to control. The photographs and documentation had been distributed too widely, analyzed by too many independent experts, and verified by too many credible sources. Dr. Whitman's death wasn't in vain. Cardinal Rossetti's years of careful planning had succeeded, and despite Burke's best efforts, the truth about the creatures had finally reached the public. 3 months later, I testified before a joint committee of the Italian Parliament and the European Union about the cover-up operations Burke's organization had conducted over the decades. The investigation revealed a network of suppression activities that extended far beyond archaeological discoveries involving the concealment of scientific research, historical documents, and technological developments that challenged established power structures. Burke himself had disappeared shortly after our escape from the construction site. Some reports suggested he'd been eliminated by his own organization for failing to contain the security breach. Others claimed he'd been arrested by intelligence agencies in countries where his activities had violated international law. I never learned his real name or which government or organization had employed him. In the end, it didn't matter. The system of suppression he'd represented was exposed and dismantled, at least partially. Father Kane continued her work with Cardinal Rossetti, helping to establish an international foundation dedicated to preserving and publicizing archaeological discoveries that had previously been suppressed. They'd identified dozens of similar cover-up operations worldwide and were working to recover evidence that had been hidden or destroyed over the years. As for the skeleton itself, Burke's people had succeeded in destroying the physical remains before the story went public. But the photographs and measurements we'd collected provided enough information for scientists to begin understanding what we'd found. The consensus among researchers was that the creatures represented a previously unknown branch of human evolution, one that had developed along different biological pathways before going extinct thousands of years ago. The bone structure suggested they'd been larger and stronger than modern humans with anatomical adaptations that indicated capabilities we could only speculate about. Religious leaders worldwide struggled to reconcile the discovery with established doctrine about human creation and divine purpose. Some embraced the findings as evidence of God's diversity in creating life. Others rejected them entirely, claiming the evidence was part of a conspiracy to undermine faith. But for most people, the discovery simply expanded their understanding of what was possible in the natural world. The creatures had existed, had lived and died like any other species, and had left behind evidence of their presence for us to find and study. I returned to archaeological work, this time with a foundation that specialized in investigating sites where unusual discoveries had been reported and subsequently covered up. We found evidence of similar creatures at locations around the world, confirming that they'd been more widespread than the single skeleton we discovered beneath the Vatican. Each new find added to our understanding of these beings and their place in human history. They'd lived alongside early human populations, had developed sophisticated tools and social structures, and had influenced human development in ways we were only beginning to understand. The knowledge changed everything and nothing. People still went to work, raised families, and lived their daily lives much as they had before. But humanity's understanding of its origins and place in the universe had expanded to include the possibility that we'd shared the world with other intelligent species. And sometimes late at night in my apartment in Rome, I thought about the moment when we'd first broken through that wall beneath St. Peter's Basilica and found the skeleton waiting in its ancient chamber. The church had tried to bury the truth along with the bones Burke's organization had killed to keep the secret hidden. But in the end, knowledge had a way of surviving attempts to suppress it. The creatures were gone, but their legacy lived on in the questions their existence raised about human nature, divine purpose, and our responsibility to seek truth regardless of the consequences. That legacy was worth dying for. And thanks to Cardinal Rossetti's courage, Dr. Whitman's sacrifice, and Father Kane's skills, it was a legacy that would endure for future generations to study and understand. The angels, if that's what they were, had finally been given their due. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Wilderness Protocol. If you made it through this report and wish to be briefed on future incidents, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.